Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me on today. Thank you very much for your time and interest in being here as well. It's an important conversation today for us to kick off Congress next week. I'm Erica McCreedy. I'm a Ngāti Raukawa Te Aitanga Hōti woman from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I currently reside on Jabbergai country in Australia. And I want to start by acknowledging the Jabbergai traditional owners and country, as well as traditional owners all the way across Australia, Oceania, at home for me in Aotearoa, and extend that all the way out globally. My candidacy for IUCN is an opportunity to bring a clear and concise voice for the Oceania region, grounded in practical Indigenous-led solutions. I am the Chief Operating Officer for the North Australian Indigenous Land and Sea Management Alliance, which is currently the only Indigenous peoples organisation member for IUCN. We joined in 2012, something that we very much would like to see more Indigenous peoples organisations joining the IUCN and having a strong Indigenous voice from the Oceania region. I started with NALSMA in 2011. I also sit on the board for the Australian Committee for IUCN and have done for the last couple of years. My advocacy for this work, for the collective work that we do, is based on the deep-seated belief in the intrinsic connection between humans and our natural world. My approach is driven from the understanding that we must reimagine conservation and how IUCN can continue to evolve to meet the urgent global challenge of biodiversity loss and climate change. So to set the foundation for my positioning, I just want to start with a key few stats, I guess, to really ground the perspective that I am coming from and the area that I have worked in for the last 16, 17 years, and just acknowledge that I've had some really strong Indigenous mentors, both Australian and New Zealand, and also globally as well, in this space that I have learned from and continue to learn from. So this is, while it's a candidacy for myself, I take very seriously that there is an opportunity to bring voices from across not just Australia, but Oceania to the table. So first of all, approximately 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity is on Indigenous lands. We all know that stat. Approximately 10% of the world's biodiversity is in Australia. Approximately 40% of Australia is Indigenous owned, either through native title or Indigenous freehold. Indigenous protected areas cover 100 million hectares, contributing to approximately 54% of the National Reserve System in Australia. 100% of Australia has Indigenous interests, and traditional owners have an unceded connection to their land and seas. Out of the 23 Global Biodiversity Framework targets, 7 targets acknowledge Indigenous rights and wisdom in the context of biodiversity conservation. The Strategy for Nature has 6 targets and 3 enablers. One of those enablers is working with and embedding Indigenous knowledge and leadership into our work, into our efforts, into our actions. The Australian Nature Repair Bill explicitly mentions Indigenous peoples or Aboriginal people at least 4 times in its objectives and provisions. So we are no longer having a conversation about whether or not Indigenous people should or should not be involved in conservation actions or decisions or developing solutions. We know that it must happen. I want to talk to these foundational points that I've just outlined under some key areas that I want to address and I want to bring to the IUCN by focusing on the collective work ahead, again, viewed through the lens of what Indigenous leadership can bring to the space. So conserving nature, reframing the foundation, number one. To achieve effective conservation, we must adopt the paradigm shift and reimagine conservation through and with Indigenous perspectives embedded into strategies and actions. So we've seen that. I just listed a range of stats. We know that these strategies exist. We know that we have frameworks and foundations that list Indigenous people as key partners or key leaders in the space. We need to now see what that actually means. That needs to translate into action, and every single one of us has a role to play in supporting that. And I believe through the shared beliefs and shared goals that we all have, regardless of what agency you're coming from or what background or what perspective. IUCN Indigenous Peoples Organisation developed the Global Indigenous Agenda for the governance of Indigenous lands, territories, waters, coastal seas and natural resources, a framework that was endorsed by IUCN in 2021 at Congress. This called for the recognition and the securement of Indigenous rights to their lands and resources and promotes Indigenous-led conservation. So we have a founding document within the IUCN that has already been endorsed and is being implemented through examples like the Pudong Indigenous Peoples Initiative, which I'll talk about in a little bit. There is an opportunity to continue these principles across all areas of conservation actions and efforts. And as an authority of conservation, the IUCN can be the leader in these efforts and these actions. Arguably in areas they are, and in others there's a lot of room to move. We can all improve, and that's just shown by the state of conservation today, the state of biodiversity today. So this requires strong and authentic partnerships across all agencies. Again, I very much advocate for and believe in that we all have a role to play in this. Nobody can do it alone, and there's not one way to do it, not in 2025, and not with targets pressing down on us over the next 5 years, which is that time frame is obviously growing shorter and shorter by the day, and we're all very aware of it. Restoration is not just about environmental recovery, but it's also about healing and empowering Indigenous communities. It is a holistic and reciprocal relationship, and I'm personally committed to maintaining, enhancing and restoring the integrity, connectivity and resilience of globally significant biodiversity. Yes, all those words meaningfully said in each and every individual meaning that brings. I have no doubt that many of us share this commonality, and that we are all working together, or we are all working to find solutions. And I think that we can continue to do that and together for a shared goal. So number 2, providing knowledge and tools and empowering future leaders. So coming down a little bit closer to the work that I've been involved in, NALSMA, in partnership with the IUCN, has run 2 reimagining conservation forums, one in 2022, one in 2024, and the next one scheduled in 2026. Some of the key themes that have emerged from these forums have come about by bringing together equal parties of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people specifically to talk about solutions for biodiversity conservation going forward. This includes Indigenous organisations, non-Indigenous organisations, environmental organisations, government, non-government. So that it really is about how do we actually reimagine what we're all doing and how can we do it better, and what does that look like in partnership. So one of the key themes that have come out of the last forums combined is centering Indigenous leadership and knowledge and the vital role of youth and elders. This is a quote from one of the young people that was at the forum, but elders are the living libraries of traditional knowledge, while youth are instrumental in carrying this forward, acting as powerful advocates of change. So we've got, again, every single person. I talked about all of us in regards to the agencies that we come from and who we represent, but it's also all ages across the board. This affects everybody, as we know. It affects more people, some people more than others. And we are all, I think, on the call in this to some extent with a real passion, drive and commitment to save our planet, essentially. I champion the integration of Indigenous knowledge with Western science to reframe our views on environmental management and ensure that that there is cultural authority over the work that is being done, especially across Indigenous lands and seas. Number 3, I spoke before about the Pudong Indigenous Peoples Initiative. In 2022, as an IUCN IPO member, Nelson was invited to be involved in the development of an Indigenous-led initiative, which came out of the agreement that I talked about before, the Global Indigenous Agenda. So that Indigenous-led focused on mobilising investment for Indigenous-led managers of biodiversity on Indigenous lands and seas and building capacity and expand on the work that Indigenous people are doing already. The initiative was developed to support the achievement of the KMGBF and the Paris Agreement. This is now known as the Pudong Indigenous Peoples Initiative, and it's a partnership between the IUCN Indigenous Peoples Organisations, and the IIFB, which is the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. This is extended further with the Congress just about to come up with the first ever Indigenous Peoples Summit. In 77 years, I think it's 77 years of Congress running, this is the first time this will be in place. While we have had a strong Indigenous leader and councillor in regards to Ramiro, who is a key mentor of mine in council, is currently a vice president along with Peter. This is also the first time that Congress will vote in an Indigenous identified Indigenous seat for council. So there's lots to be celebrated. And again, coming back to this place of we're no longer having a conversation about whether or not Indigenous people will be involved, but that it needs to happen across the board. And so what does that look like? Pudong supports Indigenous-led conservation, as I said, by providing resources and leadership to ensure Indigenous people's vital contributions to biodiversity conservation and climate change are enabled by focusing on Indigenous knowledge systems. Pudong seeks to scale up inclusive conservation action by enhancing land tenure security, advancing Indigenous-led governance and designing new financial mechanisms and influencing global policy. So again, endorsed by the IUCN, this is now how do we get into the action? What are the action stations that we are taking when we are talking about reframing conservation and reimagining what it looks like? What does that mean in an action space? What is the difference? What are the different strategies, processes that we are implementing to create action? The next one is global action to local impact. So on a national level, IUCN helps governments prepare national biodiversity policies. Internationally, IUCN provides advice to environmental conservations such as the CBD or the Framework on Convention on Climate Change. It also advises UNESCO. Not going into all of those things is an assumption that we will know what I'm talking about there, or you're already working deeply in that. So I think that the point I want to make here about global action to local impact is that it's important to draw a line from global dialogues, frameworks and mechanisms to the actions that governments then need to take to ensure that they're meeting their international commitments. So what are the impacts and opportunities for environmental organisations, for Indigenous land and sea managers, nationally, regionally and locally, when we are engaging with the IUCN, or when we are putting our voice forward to identify how the IUCN can embed that as a authority of global conservation. So every level is required to meet these global commitments. Again, it comes back to every single one of us has a role to play, actually, regardless of what role you're currently in your jobs, or how long you've been on this earth or not. We are all needed. The work being done on ground by Indigenous land and sea managers needs to be elevated by governments and by private industry, and have some direct funding to enhance benefits and opportunities and outcomes as well. We're talking about shared benefits, what that looks like, and again, how we're changing actions through implementation and through different ways of doing things. In conclusion, I'm not sure where I'm up to time-wise, but in conclusion, I want to thank everybody for that has been with me on this journey for this most of this year, supported me to get this far. Although I stand unopposed for the Australia seat, I very much would like to seek your support in this position and working with you, if successful, because voting still needs to occur over the next 4 years. I think I'll leave it there.